Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Luan, and I'll be guiding you through today's session. So, I have been a teacher for over 15 years, and during that time, I've had the privilege of teaching students from all over the world. It's been such a rewarding experience, and as usual, I'm just so excited to be just a little part of your journey. So, before we jump in, I would really love to know who's tuning in from where. So please say hello in the chat. Tell us your name and where you are in the world today. Because as I always say, with the world of TEFL, it's such an amazing experience to be able to speak to people from all over the world, starting with your TEFL course right through to your teaching career. So please put your name and where you are in the chat so that we can say hi. So in the meantime, what I'll do is I'll just run you through some of today's points to note, to take care of, just so that we have a fantastic time together, right? So I will be dealing with a very, very particular topic today, and I will answer questions at the end of the presentation, right? So for the first half of today, it's me telling you all the good information about today's topic, and thereafter I will open up Q&A, and you're more than welcome to then ask your questions. I always say to hold on to those questions until I open up Q&A and then to type them in, because if you type them in too early on, I will not see them and I may miss them, and I really don't want to. I want to be able to answer all your questions today. All right, so but just to note that only questions relating to today's topic will be answered. If you do have any questions relating to other topics, other TEFL related things, your course, the assignments, materials in the course content that you're not so sure about, please ask us on Tutor Support. And as usual, we'll be more than happy to assist you. All right, so let's see who's joining today. We don't have that many visitors yet, but I do know that the names will start coming in. So far we've got visitors from Uganda and Benoni. Welcome to you. It is fantastic to have you here today. All right, so I think without wasting any more time, let's get straight into today's presentation. I will be talking about something quite important, and that's learning styles, right? And those of you who have just come in, please type your name and where you are from in the chat function so that at a later stage we can say hi. I already see those names coming in. Hello from Palm Bay. Welcome to you. All right, so as mentioned, it's all about learning styles. And I think that this topic for me as a teacher, as an educator, as a parent, this topic is so very, very interesting. And I think that as teachers, we owe it to ourselves and our students to really get to know the different learning styles that we're going to be dealing with throughout our careers, right? So today's topic, I find, gives you a bit of insight into how your learners work, what they know, how they process information, and that sort of thing. All right, so the very first thing that we're going to do is just let you know a little bit about today's topic, what we're going to be discussing, and of course, what you are going to be asking those valuable questions about a little bit later on. So we're going to explore the different types of learning styles, as mentioned, and we're going to look at how learners process, understand, express, and also retain information. We'll take a closer look at how each learner's unique approach can impact their learning experience, and we're going to talk about some practical strategies to better support these learners in the classroom. It's all about finding ways to help our students engage with the material in a way that makes sense to them. And how satisfying is it for us as teachers just to have that look of contentment on their faces, or that light bulb moment, just flashing above the head, that look of recognition on their faces. It is a really wonderful experience for us as teachers, and I think more so for the students. So to know and to understand how they process the information, it's so, so very useful. So yeah, we're going to be looking at how learners process, understand, express, and retain information. all in today's webinar. Lots and lots of useful information. I think when you're planning your lessons, right, you're looking at the structure of your lesson plan. You're looking at your target language. You're looking at the age group of your learners. You're looking at their level. So all very, very interesting stuff and all very necessary during the planning process. But something that we sometimes forget, you know, the learning styles. How are learners going to take on board this information that I'm about to teach them? How are they going to process, understand, and express themselves, and also retain this information so that they can recall it at a later stage? Well, then let's get into it, right? So if you think about a new language, I want you for a second to think about how you think you would learn a new language. Would you be the kind of person to create mind maps or take notes? Would it be more effective for you to listen to the target language? So just listening and processing the information in that way. Do you prefer to learn in groups or do you prefer to learn alone? Perhaps you'd use a combination of these methods to remember information. Maybe your study methods will change over time. I've seen this in myself, in my own home, how a learner that learns one way initially morphs into a learner that processes and learns information in a different way. So it is possible that these study methods, these learning methods, may change or alter over time. It's unlikely that your students will have just one particular type of learning style all the way through. However, at times there might be more predominant styles in some learners, and you might notice a shift in things every now and then. So this is all quite natural, and I know you're wondering at this moment, my goodness, how do I keep on top of all of this? How do I possibly come up with lessons that just include all these learning styles? Well, it is possible. It takes a bit of work, and it takes a focus on inclusivity and really just getting to know your students and their learning methods. Right, so the next step is that we're going to have a look at the 7 learning styles, right? So drawing on psychologist Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, the 7 learning styles are as follows. So we've got spatial or visual, and those are those learners that learn through seeing information, right? And then we have auditory and musical learners, and these learners, they often learn through sound. And it's so important for us as teachers to recognize this, because it comes across as something we might not understand in the classroom, and then it's something that would be so interesting to explore when planning our lessons. And then also we have those learners that learn through movement, and that is the kinesthetic group or kinesthetic learners. And they learn by using the body through real and tangible methods, movement, feel, that sort of thing. So it's a very physical experience for them, right? And then to continue, we've also got verbal learners, and these are the learners that learn through reading, writing, words in general. We also have logical and mathematical learners. Oh, and I know I am not one of these, right? They depend on logical analysis and structural study. And then we have learners who, very interestingly, learn in an interpersonal way, so a social way. They learn better in groups or partnerships. And then we also have intrapersonal or solitary learners. And these are the learners that sort of go with self-study or learning and studying alone. It's already so interesting. As I'm going through these, as I studied these things, as I started preparing for this webinar, and I started going through all these things, it really just has you sitting still for a second and thinking, wow, all these different ways of processing information. It is so very, very interesting. All right. So when we plan lessons, I think one of the most important thing is that our lessons and teaching methods should really incorporate multiple learning styles so that all our students benefit and promote their learning adaptability. So remember earlier when I said to you, you're probably panicking, thinking, how am I going to cater for all these different learning styles? How am I going to have everybody engage in this lesson and actually learn something? Well, yeah, the key is to incorporate activities that would stimulate all these different learners. I know that you cannot possibly cram it all into one lesson, but to experiment as you go along, see what works, see what gels with your learners, and then take it from there, right? So something to remember is that when it comes to learners, variety is key. So let's just move the slides along. And what variety does in our lessons, combining all these different learning styles, it benefits our students who have trouble with certain areas in English, for example, such as studying and understanding grammar or grasping a reading text, for example. Think about it, right? I'm a reader. I love reading. I have no issue with looking at a piece of text and gaining meaning out of it. But when it comes to more analytical stuff, I sort of step back and think, this is hard, or this is more challenging than just reading something. So already my learning style starts to come through a little bit more. And that's the process I think as teachers we've got to take when planning our lessons. So through the use of various stimuli such as visuals, audio, working in groups, working in pairs, maybe trying something solo, each learning style will help strengthen our students' understanding. In addition, the learning styles will also help us elicit the new language from our students. So already, just by implementing this variety into our lessons, visuals for those visual learners, something audio for those learners who learn through listening, working in groups for the interpersonal learner, working solo for the intrapersonal learner, all just including all these various aspects will help make your lesson a lot more student-centered than teacher-focused. And that is always a good thing, right? You'll see this throughout our course that the student-centered lesson is the one that we're aiming for as teachers, no matter what. So this webinar we'll look at the different learning styles while strengthening those elements that create a great lesson. Because remember, it's a balance of all things, right? You've got your stages of your lesson, you've got age appropriate content, you've got level appropriate target language, but now combining it with understanding your learners that bit better, your lesson is going to sparkle. So let's have a look at the different learning styles and what we can do in our lessons to just give our learners the absolute best experience ever. Right, so when it comes to those visual or spatial learning styles, right, think imagery, think pictures, posters, so you've got many of EFL students that struggle with listening in English, for example. So combining visuals when eliciting target language benefits these students particularly. And these are the learners that benefit through pictures or written information, visual information that they can hold on to. And I think that to some extent, what I would like for you to do during this webinar is not only to think about the learners that you are currently teaching or going to teach, but I'd like you to think about yourself here. See if you can identify your learning style. If you already know it, great, but you might actually find that you've got another learning style, or you've got a predominant learning style and a lesser one. So I'd really like for you to go through this process and see whether you can identify what your learning style is, and it'll make you so much more aware of what your students are going through. Right, so as mentioned, the first one, visual spatial learning style, they learn through pictures, written information, visible information. To help your learners associate information visually, you can use pictures, images, posters, flashcards when presenting new items of vocabulary. You can use videos and you can use realia. For those of you who do not know what realia is, it simply means real life items. So, for example, a hair tie or a teaspoon when teaching things in the kitchen. So realia, real life objects. Also, what you can do with these visual or spatial learners, provide grammar and vocabulary charts that are color coded. Also, use different colors on the board and underline key information. I find that whether I have visual learners or whether a private student is a visual learner or not, I very often find that color coding different parts of a grammar tense really helps. And it just makes things a lot clearer. So when it comes to specific activities, let's think about things like hangman, Pictionary, describing, labeling an image, comic strip rewrites. I love using those. So all these activities have really visual aspects, right? So those students who get stimulated by what they see, they will get particularly excited and particularly engaged with activities like these. And as teachers, when you rewatch this webinar or when you take notes a little bit later on, go online, go and research more activities that would really excite the visual learner, and you'll come up with so many new things to experiment with in the classroom. All right, so now we've moved from what we see, and we're going to move over to those learners that learn through listening, right? I don't know that this is my strong point either, because very often I'd hear something and it's loud and clear. Ask me later about what it was about, and I am lost, or I have very little to tell you. So already, as I'm going through this process, I'm really thinking, I'm not that mathematical learner. I am not maybe the listening, the one that gets stimulated by listening. So I'd like for you to go through that same little trip with me and see what works for you, right? So auditory or musical learners. Oh, bless them. I wish I were one of these, but I am not. So when you think about the auditory or music learner, this is a group of people who acquire knowledge through listening and sound. And to integrate this style into your lessons, include a variety of tasks, discussions, pronunciation drills, right? Where you say a word, they say the word back, you say it again, they say it back. A group of them would say the word, two of them would say the word, one-on-one drilling, lots of sound in the classroom. Also, create grammar and vocabulary lessons around songs and videos. Those learners that respond to audio, music, they really get excited by activities that involve music, songs, just interactive videos. Encourage your students to watch films or series. Have them listen to podcasts, audiobooks outside the classroom. Of course, you would recommend age appropriate and level appropriate material, but it is something that really also excites them. And if you're looking at more specific activities, allowing students to read text aloud as well as silently, listening memory games, Jeopardy, for example. I know that in the course it says that, reading out loud for students has little educational value. And in some contexts, yes, it does. But in this particular context, where students do respond to sound and audio, it might be something quite nice for them to do. So something for you to explore for your auditory or musical listening style learners. All right. Now, those learners that like to move. So think about it this way. When you think about learners that like to move, I'm guessing that you're thinking about young learners, right? But I'd like you to actually just broaden that a little bit, because learners who benefit kinesthetically from lessons retain information when they are physically engaged in tasks and participate actively in the content that they are learning. Not only children, adults also learn in this way. Of course, as a teacher, you're going to factor their age into your planning, but definitely don't leave this only for the young learners. Think about your adult learners too, and the fact that some of them might be kinesthetic and also enjoy movement, right? So to bring this into your lessons, and I just love this, Include some physical movement. Use props again, realia, things that they would have to use with their hands. Present new information through real life situations and practical examples. And these are those, and as you can see, it's not only about them moving, but it's about keeping things really practical and really relatable, right? So for your younger learners, some specific activities, think about blocks, think about puzzles, board games, crafts, charades. My class, they love charades, the younger learners. Show and tell is one of their favorite things to do. So definitely think about those activities for your younger learners. But then also for your adult learners, think about your task-based learning, right? Think about presentations, role plays, simulation, also things where they maybe have to move around and ask each other questions and actually make something, you know, just something that gives them that element of movement. If you've got younger learners in your class and they need to move around a little bit, maybe it's not always easy for you to incorporate it into every lesson, but you can also give them little tasks to do. So say, for example, you've got this learner, kinesthetic learner, they need to move. You can also give them little tasks to do to help you. And they do appreciate that. I've seen it in my own classrooms. All right, so the next learning style that we're going to analyze a little bit more, I think I might slot into this one a little bit. I don't know about you, maybe it's time to ask yourself the question. So with the verbal or reading/writing style, students process information in words, whether they are written or spoken. For me, more written, maybe for you, more spoken, maybe a little bit of both, right? And to bring this into your lessons, think about including, oh goodness me, speaking tasks for your students, reading activities, written assignments and tasks. Now, not every student likes this, but most of your students will see the benefit in these tasks. When it comes to speaking tasks, they're a little bit more open to it because that's what they're in your class for, right? They actually want to speak English, so that's why they're there. So give them the opportunity, teachers. Set up speaking activities and just let them go. Of course, you're going to monitor, you're going to take down notes of errors that they make, but allow them just to communicate. Because think about it this way, it's what they're going to have to do with the language you're teaching them outside of the classroom. So, oh, for goodness sake, give them the opportunity in your lesson. It's also such a lovely thing for the teacher to watch. When you assign a topic and a task and you step back and you allow them to speak, it gives you a fantastic idea of who knows what and what your students are interested in. So when it comes to specific activities for these verbal or reading, writing style learners, think about storytelling. And I don't mean just you telling them stories. Put them in pairs and let them tell stories to each other. Give them a topic, give them some visual imagery just to prompt conversation maybe, and then also give them a few keywords. And I don't know if you see that a few learning styles are getting catered for there. You've got the image for your visual learners. You've got keywords for those learners that that learn through words, verbal, written, and then also you've got the speaking activity for these students. Also think about category games, think about worksheets for them to do, and think about journaling, right? I know that journaling is something that it's got to be quite personal, it's got to be quite, that you volunteer to do it, but I think that journaling can be quite interesting for students. If you keep it simple, have journals in the classroom, 5 minutes to end the day, say, right, we're going to write a journal entry now about what we learned, how we felt, and what was interesting or difficult in this lesson, or just about their day. That could also be fun. Right, so that is the verbal reading, writing style learner. I'm thinking I might slot in there because I will tell you, I certainly do not slot into the next one. I think if you've joined from the start, you may guess the next one is logical and mathematical, right? this is not me. But I do so like to integrate activities into my lessons for these learners because they learn in such a fascinating and interesting way. So it's your logical mathematical group, and these students, they process information through analytical skills and systems. And to bring the style of learning into your classroom, break down language structures into tables and charts. I think you can see where this is going, right? Aim for lessons to follow a logical structure. It's also something they hold on to. And activities that promote logical thinking and reasoning, right? So negotiating to an end point, comparing and making a decision, something discursive, right? So these learners like a process and an outcome. So I think already your teacher brains are working overtime with all the activities you can include for these learners. And these are mathematical style learners, but yes, they're present in your language classroom. So some specific activities, think about having students prepare an argument for debate. So for and against maybe, include sequencing activities and problem solving tasks. Now remember, problem solving tasks as in a language related, a language based problem solving task. So, you're in a hot air balloon and these are the personalities in the balloon, but you've got to get rid of one, which one would it be? That might be a bit dark, but again, they've got to have an outcome by the end of the process. Maybe they've got to look at a few images and they've got to decide which image would be a good idea for the cover of a magazine about student life. And again, there's that visual aspect being brought in, the vocabulary for the previous learners we spoke about, and then that analytical or that critical thinking comes in for your logical or mathematical style, all in one task. So you see, teachers, it's not about coming up with 100 tasks or 7 different tasks for seven different learning styles. Very often, a good task will include something for all these learners. That's quite fun. All right, so come up with tasks that will stimulate the various learners, but yes, for the logical, mathematical style, they need sequence, they need logic, they need structure, they need analytical thinking, and they need an outcome. They need to reason and have an outcome at the end of the process. Right, and then we have learners who learn best when they're with people, right? So let's just look a little bit at interpersonal or social learning situations. Now, learners who benefit from learning interpersonally process information when they learn in groups or pairs. That's so interesting for me. And for this style, think about peer correction, peer teaching. Now, what does that look like? Peer correction, teachers, instead of taking in all 27 worksheets, have them swap them around, have them correct each other's work, have them make notes for their friends so that when the friend goes home and studies, there's a correction, there are some notes there. It really gives them that sense of autonomy, even though they're working together, right? Peer teaching, I often like to do this in a plenary of a grammar lesson or a vocabulary lesson. And I say to my students, right, so the person next to you arrived late for class today and they missed a whole bunch of useful bits of information. Quickly, in 5 minutes, catch them up. Tell them what the lesson was about. Just summarize for them. Quick 5-minute lesson. And again, what it does is it cements the information you've taught them, it gets them engaging and communicating, but also gives them that sense of autonomy, but also working together. It's bizarre, but it works. All right, also think about group work, pair work, teamwork, and encourage an environment where learners can feel free to speak. I know that it's not always easy to speak in front of other people. I'm not a fan of that myself, and yet here I am, a teacher. But remember that teaching or being in a class and learning a language is not public speaking per se, and they might have a little bit of issue with having to produce language in front of everyone or being watched. So make sure that the environment you create is one where it's okay to slip up, make mistakes, get things wrong. In fact, I tell my students and my trainee teachers that when you're with me, that's when I want you to make your mistakes. I need for you to make mistakes in this class so that I can correct them before you go out there and use the target language outside. And that already just brings down that nervous energy, and the students feel all right to make mistakes and speak freely in front of others. Also include as much interaction as students between students as possible. Remember earlier we spoke about that student-centered lesson. This is where this comes in also. When there is interaction between your students, you're out of the equation. You've given the instruction, you are monitoring the activity, but they are handling everything themselves. And that again takes you out of the equation and makes your lesson very much student-centered. So let's think about learners that learn interpersonally and some specific activities that we can incorporate into the classroom. So earlier on, we spoke about storytelling. Once again, share stories, have them compare opinions, have them interview each other. Have them conduct surveys, based on the target language around the classroom. If you have taught them the present simple tense, for example, and the context and function is to express routines and daily activities, you could have a survey of, find someone who wakes up at 6, find someone who drinks coffee for breakfast, find someone who never has breakfast, find someone who always has breakfast, find someone who takes the bus. So you can incorporate your target language into something like an interview or a survey. And again, you've got that working together aspect down in your lesson, right? Think of mystery games, negotiations, where students need to really collaborate as a team. And those learners that learn interpersonally, they are fully stimulated. Granted, not every activity can be like this, but as long as you include an activity like this every now and then into your lessons, those learners also have their time. And then let's look at the flip side, the other side of things, right? Those learners that learn intrapersonally, those solitary, those lone wolf learners. I think I'm one of those. And when it comes to this particular student, they process information through self-study. I think I'm that way. And my son, who is 16, is actually like that as well. He works best on his own. Socially, he's all over the place and has so many friends. But when it comes to studying and processing information, he prefers to do it all on his own. He puts on some music, believe it or not, studies by himself, and asks me questions when he needs to. And I see this in him, and I see this in so many of my students. Maybe you'll see it in yourself today or in some of your students, right? So learners who process information through self-study. And to bring this into your lessons, it's quite simple. Let your students simply work alone at times during the lesson. Where applicable, delegate individual tasks to students. Even if they're working in groups, give them an individual task. So this one has to find vocabulary items. This one has to come up with a name for the article they're writing. This one has to come up with this. This one has to find an image. So you give them each an individual task, even though they're working together. Smart, right? So when you have students like these, also homework encourages self-study. So more specific ideas or more specific tasks that you can bring into your lessons, think about giving them an individual research project to work on. They could also keep an English journal. I once had a student who was very much an intrapersonal learner. She was a lovely girl, loved being socially out there. But when it came to learning, she liked to do things on her own. And we had the little journal agreement. So she would write a journal entry every day, and then she'd bring it to me quickly the next morning. And for 2 minutes, I would just go over it and tell her a little bit about it, or we'd talk about it. And then I knew that even if she doesn't produce as much in the actual lesson, we've already had our time. So just little ways of also connecting with these students who actually prefer to work on their own. Right. Okay, so when it comes to the classroom, incorporating the different learning styles into the lessons, it's a really helpful way to promote inclusivity, and this really keeps motivation levels up and high, and students are engaged, and they do exactly what they're supposed to be doing in your class, and that's learning, right? So interestingly, the different learning styles make for fantastic lessons, and they link to what is necessary when learning a language, like we said earlier, including visuals, listening tasks, reading and writing, speaking, pair work, group work, and individual work. So I'd like you to visualize, let's say, for example, a PPP lesson, right? A grammar lesson, PPP. And we all know that the stages of, or maybe not all of us, because you might be on different sections of the online course, but a PPP lesson plan is a very common and well-known lesson plan structure out there, right? So it's got a warmer right at the start, and then it's got the 3 Ps, which is present, practice, and produce. And right at the end, also coincidentally with the P, the plenary. Now, if you think about it this way, if you're teaching the present simple to talk about daily routines, in your warmer, you could show a character and the character doing different things during the day. And in the warmer, you could ask them, what do you think the lesson is going to, or the lesson is all about today? And then just in pairs, have them discuss the pictures and talk about what they think the lesson is going to be about, right? So what that does is it already includes the visual aspect. There's something to prompt speaking for those learners who learn through that way. Then you've also got that pair work element, right? You could give them a minute to just look at the pictures on their own first, giving them something to do alone. So already in just the warmer, which should really last just about 5 minutes, you've already included several learning styles in one short activity. During your presentation activity, well, here you're going to be eliciting sentences to write on the board in the tense that you're teaching. So you're going to use the pictures, you're going to elicit and bring information out of them. And again, you're going to write the sentence on the board, right? Then you're going to look at meaning, form, pronunciation. There's going to be drilling of particular pronunciation aspects of the grammar. So again, those auditory learners are included there too. Then you're looking at the practice stage, and this is for controlled practice, where they maybe do a worksheet of some kind. And again, those students who respond to written material and writing material, those accuracy mathematical style learners, it's all about accuracy is the controlled practice, so they have their time to shine. And then you have produce right at the end, where they're supposed to now relax into a lovely speaking activity, freer speaking, right? And again, role plays, there's that pair work, group work for those interpersonal learners, those social learners, but also learners that learn through speaking. So, and then in the plenary, they can do a little bit of peer teaching. And if you look at that one lesson, a very simple lesson that we've just talked through, all the learning styles have been included in that one lesson. So it's not about stressing and thinking, how am I going to help all these learners in one lesson? It's so very, very, very doable. All right, so I do hope that what I've been talking about today has been helpful to you. I will say that as a teacher, and as a teacher of over 15 years, going through this content when preparing this webinar certainly made me realize, I'm so happy that I revisited this, because it definitely is a refresher for all those lessons I'm going to be preparing for this week and the coming week. So yeah, I hope that that was absolutely useful. And now what we're going to do is I've come to the end of the presentation section. So remember, we've looked at the 7 different learning styles. We've looked at how to incorporate these styles into our lessons. And also we've looked at very specific examples of activities that we could do to engage and stimulate these learners, right? So we've looked at all these, and now, of course, you have the opportunity to ask your questions. And if I cannot answer your particular question, please don't stress. I will absolutely do my best, or you are more than welcome to contact tutor support where we can give you a bit of more of a detailed answer to your question. But of course, we're here right now and I will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. But I would like to remind you, please, that this is not quite the time to ask about the assignments or to ask about topics that were not included in today's particular webinar. Those would need to go to tutor support, where we are also very happy to help you. So questions about today's webinar only will be handled in this section. Also, just remember that all these previous webinars, today's will be available in about 2 days or so. And all the previous webinars that you might have missed are all available on our YouTube channel. It's really such a gift because I know that I go through so many of them just to help planning lessons or to get new ideas. So if I'm doing it, I know it will benefit you. So please have a look at our YouTube channel and see if today's or any other webinars are of interest to you. All right. So now is the time for you to ask me all those very, very important questions. And just to say hello to those who came in a little bit later. Shakia, it's nice to meet you. We have visitors still coming in from Durban, South Africa, Nigeria, Cape Town, South Africa, where I'm from. Hello to you. Johannesburg and Zimbabwe. It's really nice to have you all here with us today. All right, so I also got a comment that role play is usually good from Royal Chance. Thank you for that, because absolutely, I cannot live without role plays in my lessons. I need to incorporate it. I find a way to incorporate a role play into every single lesson. But I just want to, and please write your questions right now. We have limited time, so if you don't put your questions in, I might not get to them before the session ends. Please type your questions, right? So when we structure role plays in the class, please remember that a role play is not really a mime or where students work together to finish each other's sentences. A role play is where the teacher actively allocates each student with a role or a character and gives them a scenario to act out. So for example, student A, you are the reporter, and student B, you are a witness who you were at the park on Saturday and you saw someone's picnic getting stolen. So you're going to have that little role play. Or student A, you are a local in your town. Student B, you are visiting from out of town. Student A, please give student B some advice, and student B, please ask questions. That is what a role play entails. Please note that a mime is not really a role play, or giving students one sentence and they've got to finish another, not quite a role play. A role play is something very specific and a lot of fun. All right, so a couple of questions have come in. Deborah has said from Grenada, hello to you. Thank you very much for the fabulous suggestions for strategies to include in multimodal lessons. Absolutely. I think that it's so important to keep students engaged. We're there for them in the first place, right? So the lessons really should be all about them and their learning styles. And you're welcome. Let's see. Okay, so here's an interesting one. Relearning through interactions. Will students be worse off by picking up mistakes? Will students be worse off by picking up mistakes from other students, especially if they may not? Okay, so I would only, great question. And the answer is all about timing, right? So I wouldn't necessarily give them something to error correct or peer teach each other early on in the lesson. It needs to be once they have learned the target language, practiced it well, produced it in that final stage, and then maybe you can do a little bit of peer teaching. And remember, you're there to monitor, right? Don't allocate a task that you can't monitor. So if your students are misleading each other in some shape or form, yes, that's where you would need to step in and you would have to say to them, great work so far, but just to correct you here, it's this way and not that way. Let's try that quickly. Right, now continue. So one, it's about timing. Peer teaching or peer correction must not happen early on. It needs to happen after they've had sufficient practice, and also you would need to monitor. Great question. All right. Sarah, thank you for your question. From the Netherlands, hello. You mentioned color coding grammar when you were talking about visual or spatial learning. What is a good color coding? Oh, Sarah, no, it's a lot simpler than you think, right? So when I am eliciting a model sentence in the present continuous, the present continuous is she is talking, they are doing, and it's made up of a subject, an auxiliary in the present, and a verb with ing. So the subject would maybe be in red, the auxiliary would be in green, and the verb with ing would be in blue. So that there is a very clear distinction between the three. That's basically what we mean by color coding it, just so that your students, those visual learners that don't only respond to words, but they respond to something a little bit more, and that's maybe color, that would be another way of presenting the grammar to them by color coding the different aspects of grammar. So subject in red, the is, are, am, the auxiliary verb in green, and the verb ing in blue. Maybe the verb in blue and the ing in purple so that they don't forget that ing, right? So that's what we mean by color coding, if that makes any sense. All right. Okay, let's see. I love pair work. So Devi, I don't even know what your full question is yet. I just saw the word pair work and I thought must answer this one. So let's actually see what your question is all about. Thanks for sharing. One question: when teaching a group class or doing pair exercises, do you usually try to pair learners that have a similar learning style? You know, Devi, when it comes to pair work, a couple of things would maybe need to be considered, and that is learning style and personality, right? So I know that some people might say, put two students together who do not like each other, and no, I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to try and pair people up in a conscientious manner, just looking at the personality types and that sort of thing. A lot of people also say pair a very quiet student with a very domineering student. I would not do that because I want them both to feel like they have the platform. So Debbie, I think the idea is just to have a look at what you've got going on, who feels comfortable working in pairs. If it's someone that is extremely nervous, maybe pair them with someone who is, gentle, kind, and patient. So I think it's maybe not only learning style that you would have to look at here, but also personalities a little bit. This certainly helps me because you might not have analyzed that student's learning style yet, but you certainly know a little bit about their personality 5 minutes after they've walked into your classroom. So I would say that's a better jumping off point. And then as you get to know them very well, then you can see what works. I would say that it's not about pairing someone up with someone with the same learning style, but incorporating activities into your lesson that cater to every single learning style in the classroom, if that makes sense. Okay, right. So this is a great question. What is the best way to feedback on errors and highlight other things they might have said? How to feel comfortable with saying they can do more and make them still feel good? Okay, Sarah, please listen to our podcast on feedback. We did a podcast just a few days ago, and I said to my colleague and co-host, why have we not done this one sooner? Because it's all about feedback and when to give it. Not only when to give it, how to give it, how to structure the feedback, what words to say and what not to say. So, you know what? When it comes to giving feedback on errors, your students know that this comes part and parcel with the lesson. Error correction is going to happen. I would say if it's an accuracy-based task, like a worksheet, okay, then you would check the corrections immediately after they've done it, right? If, however, it's during a fluency activity, a role play, a conversation, I wouldn't jump in while they're there. Just the only time I would interrupt a fluency activity is maybe if the mistake someone in the pair or the group is making is so huge that it's sort of taking them off track. I would maybe gently just step in, shift them the right way, and then step back out. When it comes to actual error correction, after a fluency activity. So if they're doing a pair work, a role play, conversation, debate, I would give them corrections to their mistakes afterwards. Definitely. And then please, I'm going to really just urge you to listen to that podcast on feedback. It might be released or it might be in a couple of weeks, but it's all about how to say things. Sandwiching feedback, starting with a positive comment, then telling them what they need to work on, and then end with something that they feel will motivate them going forward. Another thing is separate the student from the mistake. So not you did a bad job there, or you did it wrong, or why did you say that? Rather, can we find a better way to say that? Or can we find a different way to say that instead of saying you did that incorrectly? Another way would be to just keep, I like to do error correction as group. So I would write down some mistakes on the board, but I would say overheard. Just overheard these mistakes so that they don't feel focused on, but that they know that that was a mistake, and then they make notes on these. So there's so many different ways, Sarah, of giving feedback in a kind way and in a way that motivates students and makes them feel like they still want to come back to class the next day. But definitely we unpack that not only in the podcast, but to have a look. There's also a webinar, I think, on feedback. It's called Feedback is a Gift. Please watch that as well. Lots of useful stuff in there, because your question is so extremely valid. Let's see. I think I answered Daisy. I think I answered a little bit about grouping them to their learning styles. I think it's, for me personally, it's more about personalities, because their learning styles, they might have more than one, and it's going to be difficult to just perfectly group them in that way. It might not work with numbers, that sort of thing. So it's more about, and just to let you all know, it's in connection with Daisy's question, it's more about including a variety of activities that speak to the different types of styles rather than pairing them up together, because that might not always be possible in your lesson. All right. So let's see. Okay. About peer teaching, you talked about corrections, yes, and notes. What would be typical examples of things you would see students write in their corrections and notes? Oh, Sarah, so some students write down everything and some students write down nothing. I actually have them take out a little notebook, and then I jot down some of the mistakes that I might have heard during a fluency activity, because remember, I don't jump in while they're talking to correct them. So I would write down overheard, pre-teach that word, like eavesdrop or overheard, and then I write down some of the mistakes. Sometimes I change the vocabulary a little bit so that they don't feel, especially if it was something that maybe someone else heard too, I would change it up a little bit and focus more on the actual structural mistake, write those down, and then I would say, right, now you're going to write down these and their corrections. And that would actually be something that I monitor. Error correction is not only about correcting them in the moment, but actually making a bit of an activity out of it so that they do not make the same mistakes again. This is up to you, but I tend to, especially after a fluency activity, during the plenary, I like to do a correction spot by just an error correction spot by just noting some of the mistakes on the board and then going through why these are mistakes. It could even be part of your plenary, putting them in pairs and saying, right, why do you think these are mistakes and how would you correct them? They would try in pairs and then I would give them the set of corrections at the end. It's a nice activity as well. And it also just consolidates the lesson. All right. Okay. Happy to have helped. And yes, listen to the podcast. So let's see. Yes, absolutely. You can use the third person. Yes. Remember, I said earlier, separate the person from the feedback, separate the person from the mistake. Absolutely, you can. Because remember, some students, and this is such a funny thing, Sarah, and to all of you listening, some students respond well to correction. And sort of take it on board and oh they're such troopers and they write down the mistake versus the correction. Other students don't, and this could be down to personality. This could be down to culture, that they just don't respond to being told that they've done something wrong, maybe in front of others, and it could be humiliating for them, right? So, oh, as a teacher, we've just got to find all these tricky ways of giving them feedback or doing error correction without making them feel embarrassed about it. And I always remind my students, I say to them, if you do not make mistakes in my class, I don't have a job. You need to make mistakes. I need for you to make them here. So by the time you leave my classroom, you can use this new tense well outside. You can use it perfectly. Inside, please make your mistakes here. Yeah, make them okay with mistakes. It takes some time, particularly with, like I said, personality types or certain cultures, but you get there. You absolutely get there. All right, so Deborah has said, I'm so glad that you said about not labeling students as it can be limiting for them. Absolutely. I'm still on Unit 1 and appreciate that the differentiation section mentions this too. Yes, because differentiation is all about, again, having those different people, ideas, styles, backgrounds, all in one classroom. And oh my goodness, Deborah, you're going to have them all in one classroom unless you're teaching one-on-one. So yes, very important. If you go away with nothing else from this webinar, go away with the fact that when you do error correction, focus on the mistake, not on the student. It really helps and it makes that student okay with thinking it was a mistake I made. I am not a mistake. I am not the problem. I just made a mistake. It absolutely helps. And it's so funny how our conversation around learning styles has morphed into error correction because so many students take on feedback in such different ways. And this has got something to do, I guess, with learner styles too. All right, so are there any other questions that I need to get to before we say goodbye and before you go and weekend? So let me see if I've missed anything. Thank you, Sarah. It's an absolute pleasure. It's a topic I think I feel very passionate about. And I think as teachers, because you are here today, you probably feel the way I do, that understanding your learners' learning styles is as important as all those other things that we include in our lesson planning. It's something so integral, something so very, very important. All right, so a couple of things before we go, and also remember that if you do think of something at a later stage or you would like a question to be answered, but you did not ask today, or at this point we wouldn't have time to get into another one, do send those questions to Tutor Support. We are basically there for you 7 days a week, most of the hours, and we'll be happy to answer your questions, whether they be about today's webinar or whether they be about something entirely different. You can ask us on Tutor Support. All right. Something else that we need for you to do is for you to fill in our survey. It always just helps us understand where you're at and what we're doing okay, what we need to improve on. So I'm going to be displaying the survey on the board in a second, but also in the chat right now. And even if you filled it in before, if it gives you the opportunity to fill it in again, go for it. If it says thank you, you've already done it, that's fine too. All right. And then to all our visitors from Nigeria to Brazil to where else? New York, wow, Cape Town, South Africa. It was wonderful spending this hour with you and just sharing something so interesting with each other. I wish you a wonderful weekend. Enjoy what's left of it. You still have a beautiful day left tomorrow. And yeah, catch us next time. These webinars are weekly, same time, same place. Next week, different tutor, different topic. All right, see you next time.